Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so much. I stayed at the clinic for 3 days, only leaving once the stomach pain had become bearable. During those 3 days, John Miller never came to see me. I handled everything myself, every injection, every bill, every errand. He was too busy wiping away Joan's tears and comforting her fragile emotions, acting like she had been forced into marriage. Of course, he didn't have the time to care about me. When I got home, I was packing my things when John walked in. He glanced around the house with clear irritation and said, "You've been gone for 3 days and you didn't think to tidy up the place? It's a mess." Honestly, the bed wasn't made, and there were a few clothes lying around, but that's just how he was. One minor inconvenience and he'd immediately show a sour face. I looked at him lightly and didn't stop folding my clothes. I said flatly, "I just got out of the hospital." John paused for a second and stared at my lips for a while. Then, to my surprise, he started helping me organize the wardrobe, his voice softening as he asked, "How are you feeling?" I scoffed inwardly. I didn't expect him to ask such a thing. "I'm okay," I replied, not even looking at him as I continued packing my clothes into the bag. John noticed what I was doing and casually asked, "Why are you packing our clothes?" "To wash them," I replied, holding the bag close to my chest without giving him any expression. He clearly cared about what I was planning but simply nodded and said nothing more. After putting the bag away in the storage room, I came back into the house. John stood there holding a nicely wrapped bag. He waved at me with a gentle smile and said, "Come here, I got this for you." When I went into town, I stood still. He didn't get annoyed. Instead, he walked over with a warm smile, opened the bag, and took out a bridal veil. He placed it on my head, gently adjusted it in front of the mirror, and smiled at the wedding. I saw the bride wearing a veil like this, and my first thought was that I would look beautiful in it, so I bought one for you. As I looked at myself in the mirror with the veil on, a wave of bitterness rushed through me. In my past life, I had spent years hoping John would one day buy me a veil and give me a proper wedding. I waited my whole life, but it never happened. In this life, simply because I didn't throw a tantrum, he fulfilled that wish for me. Before, I probably would have been deeply moved, but now my heart was as still as water. I took off the veil without expression and said, "I don't like this." John hadn't expected that. His face turned dark with rage as if he wanted to say, "You really don't know what's good for you." He snapped, "Whatever, keep it or don't, I don't care." I didn't respond. Then he said, "Didn't the factory name you as one of the outstanding workers? Joan was right behind you on the list. Why don't you tell them to give the spot to her?" My eyes dimmed. So that's what all this sweet talk was about. That spot was something I worked hard for myself. I clearly stated I don't want to give it up. John's face turned impatient as he frowned deeply. "Joan just married into the city. Only outstanding workers get the benefits of working there. Can't you understand how hard things are for her?" I sneered. Joan was already married, yet he was still going out of his way to plan for her future. No wonder she stayed in his heart for over 30 years. I thought back to my past life when my confirmed nomination was suddenly revoked and Joan was given the spot. Judging by his behavior now, it was probably John who sabotaged my ranking just to help her. I looked him in the eye and calmly said that nomination was earned through my own effort. My composure only infuriated him more. Clenching his fists, he gritted his teeth and shouted, "I don't know how I ended up marrying such a cold, heartless woman. You're completely unfeeling." Then he slammed the door hard, and the already rickety wooden frame rattled loudly. After that, John left for the city again. He didn't come home that night. I only found out from the ticket seller at the station the next day. It was obvious who he had gone to see. In my past life, even after a fight, he wouldn't immediately head into the city. At most, he'd spend the night at the school office waiting for me to show up the next morning and beg him to come home. Or maybe back then he did go into the city and I just never knew. But in this life, I would never again crush my pride to win him back. I bought a train ticket at the station for a trip to Shenzhen 5 days later. I wasn't in a rush to go home. Instead, I wandered around the city for a while. This was only my second time in the city. The first time was when John Miller brought me here. As I walked down the street, I couldn't help but think about when we first started dating. We met through a blind date. He was straightforward and not very good at wooing women. After just a few meetings, he asked if I wanted to visit the city with him. While we walked around, he introduced me to every little novelty he came across. He bought me cotton candy, sugar-coated hawthorns, and a bunch of hair clips. That was the first time I'd ever tasted something so sweet it hurt my teeth. As we kept walking, he suddenly grabbed my hand. He was so nervous I could hear his heartbeat. He said, "Lily, I don't really know how to treat a girl right. People say if you like someone, you should keep buying them gifts. He didn't even know how to confess his feelings. Somehow in that confused moment, I ended up with him. If I had known back then that John frequently came to Jincheng just to chase after Joan, maybe I wouldn't have looked forward to his visit so much. I stayed by John's side for half a lifetime waiting. After Joan passed away from illness, his attitude toward me finally changed. I thought the stone had finally blossomed, that our love had found its ending. But in the end, it was all just a foolish delusion. In John's eyes, I was nothing more than the woman he married out of obligation without love. Always be open to only one person. As I walked along the roadside, I suddenly froze. Not far ahead, I saw a familiar figure. John was riding a bicycle with Joan sitting on the back. She was laughing sweetly, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face full of happiness. But the moment they saw me, John's smile froze. Joan was the first to get off the bike and greet me. She looked me up and down with a mocking smile and said, "Lily, are you here to find John? He just told me he was sure you'd come to beg him to go home." Every word she said dripped with sarcasm and disdain. John pushed the bike over with a displeased look. "Why are you here? Don't think I'll go back with you just because you beg a little like before," he said smugly. I looked at his self-satisfied face and calmly replied, "I'm just passing by." John furrowed his brows, clearly not believing me. He walked up to me, his tone softening. "All right, I don't feel like arguing. Let's go home." I didn't even bother answering. I simply stepped to the side, widening the distance between us. But John suddenly grabbed my wrist, his face darkening. I wasn't prepared for his force, and my stomach slammed into the edge of a parked bicycle. A sharp pain spread through my body, and I crouched down, clutching myself tightly. Panic flashed across John's face. He knelt down quickly, asking anxiously, "What's wrong? Did you hit your stomach? Come on, I'll take you to the clinic." I frowned in pain, cold sweat beading on my forehead. I nodded weakly. He helped me up and placed me on the bike. As he began to pedal, we had only gone a few steps when Joan suddenly screamed. John stopped the bike immediately, rushing over to her in a panic. "What happened?" Joan was sitting on the ground, pointing at her ankle like she had twisted it. I knew the moment he walked over, he wouldn't be taking me to the clinic anymore. And just as I expected, John hesitated only for a moment before carefully helping me down and saying, with all his attention on her, "Joan's injury seems more serious. You wait here. After I take her over, I'll come back for you. Just hang in there a little longer." John said that, then quickly rode off with Joan, not once looking back at me. I wasn't foolish enough to keep waiting. I forced myself to stand up, dragged my aching body to a nearby pharmacy, and bought some painkillers. After getting home, I didn't rush to leave immediately. I had bought a train ticket scheduled for the day before the results of the outstanding worker selection at the factory would be announced. Even though I knew that within a few years the factory would begin laying people off and eventually collapse, I still didn't want to give up the spot that rightfully belonged to me and hand it over to Joan. After all, in my previous life, Joan had taken that spot and used it to mock me more than once. She also snatched away many things I loved, so this time I went straight to the factory and made it clear that the spot had to go to me. It was what I deserved. Final results were about to be released. Supervisor Wang sent someone to call me into the factory. John and Joan were already there. Ever since he went into the city last time, he hadn't returned, so it was obvious he'd been spending every waking moment taking care of Joan. When his gaze landed on me, it felt like 1,000 years of ice pressing down on my shoulders. With a low, angry voice, he snapped, "Didn't I tell you to give up your nomination?" I replied lightly, "I never agreed to that." Joan's eyes were red and puffy, her face was scrunched up in distress as she clung to John's sleeve and said, "John, I believe you'll make things right for me." As soon as she looked at him, the coldness in John's eyes melted. His face filled with tenderness as he handed her a tissue and gently wiped her tears. His voice was so soft it didn't even sound like him. "I'll help you." Supervisor Wang let out an awkward cough and turned to me. "Lily, John says you agreed to give up the outstanding worker nomination. Is that true?" He was an old hand. Just one glance and he understood what was really going on. His question was clearly siding with me. I shook my head. "No, I never said I'd give it up." He nodded with a sigh and said to John, "You see, Lily herself never said she was willing to give up the spot. It doesn't matter what anyone else says." Joan began crying even harder and leaned closer into John's chest, sobbing, "John, you promised you'd help me." He wrapped his arms tightly around her, the picture of concern and affection. My eyes stung with bitterness. All this time, I had thought John was a refined, reserved man. He never showed affection in public. Even holding hands or hugging was something he avoided. Once I went to pick him up from work, and when my finger accidentally brushed his pinky, he turned cold-faced immediately. Right in front of our neighbors, he scolded me like I was trash, accusing me of ruining his image as a teacher, saying I was inconsiderate and inappropriate. In my past life, I thought he was just uptight and tried to swallow my grievances, convincing myself to understand his personality. It wasn't until now, seeing how wholeheartedly he loved someone, that I finally understood it was never about his personality. He just didn't love me. John's voice yanked me from my thoughts. Still holding Joan close, he declared, "Doesn't the factory have a rule that the outstanding worker title is only given to those with a registered spouse?" Supervisor Wong nodded. "Yes, that's one of the conditions." At that moment, Joan turned her head and shot me a provocative look. My fingers clenched tightly into my palms and my tongue felt bitter. I knew exactly what John was going to say next. So this was how, in my last life, he had betrayed me for Joan by publicly exposing my most painful secret. Without a moment's hesitation, he said in front of everyone in the office, "Lily and I aren't legally married. She was adopted as a child bride by my parents and married off to an older man. Her household registrar. The situation is still tied to him enough." I roared, cutting him off. My voice cracked with rage, and tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I stared at him with lifeless eyes and let out a bitter laugh. He had promised, sworn that he would never tell anyone that secret. It was the darkest, most painful shame of my entire life, but just for Joan, he had broken that vow without a second thought. The pain in my chest was so intense it felt like I couldn't breathe. So this was what true crushing disappointment felt like. I studied myself and turned to Supervisor Wang. "He's right, I have no legal connection to him. I don't want the nomination anymore." Then I looked directly at John and said, "Numb and drained, give the title to the woman you love, Joan. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other." Everyone in the office was still in shock, trying to digest what they had just heard. Supervisor Wang cast me a look full of concern, but he stayed silent for a long moment. It wasn't until Joan, with tearful eyes and a faint smile, spoke up that the silence was broken. "Supervisor Wang, does this mean the outstanding worker title should go to me?" John Miller stood there, lips pressed tightly together, staring at me. His eyes were filled with uncertainty and regret. I didn't respond to his look since he had already said what he said. Whether or not he felt guilty no longer mattered to me. I turned to Supervisor Wang and said, "Sir, if there's nothing else, I'll be leaving now." Before he could react, I had already stepped out of the office. Suddenly he called out, "No, this time the outstanding worker title can only go to you." I stopped in my tracks and turned to look at him. His eyes were brimming with tears. He continued, "Lily, none of us knew what kind of life you used to live, but now that we do, we still won't look down on you. Whether or not you have a registered spouse doesn't change the fact that your performance at the factory has always been undeniable. Being raised as a child bride, everyone knows what kind of treatment comes with that. Cold indifference, neglect, abuse. Every terrible word you could imagine had been part of my reality. My birth was just a transaction for money. I would never forget the despair and suffocation I felt the moment I was delivered to the home of a man 30 years older than me, paralyzed from the waist down. It took me an entire year to escape that place and flee to somewhere no one knew my past, believing I could finally start over. I told John that secret because at the time, he was the only one who had shown me any kindness. I never imagined that in my past life, he had already exposed the very secret I thought I had hidden so well. "There's no need, Supervisor Wang," I said calmly. "If he wants the title, let him have it. By the way, my resignation request hasn't been approved yet. Please process it as soon as possible." I felt no attachment. I turned to leave without hesitation, but John chased after me again. His expression wavered for a long moment before he finally spoke. "Lily, I'm sorry. I only said that in the heat of the moment." Seeing how I didn't argue or fight back, he finally began to feel a shred of guilt. I chuckled bitterly. "How ridiculous," I said coldly. "You don't have to apologize. After all, she's the one you love most, isn't she? It's only natural that you treat me this way. We never truly had anything between us to begin with." John's jaw clenched tightly. He lowered his voice. "Don't say that. I only see her as a close friend. How could you say we had nothing? We're husband and wife. Everyone knows that." 10 minutes ago, he was publicly denying our relationship for Joan's sake, and now he wanted to say these words just to ease his fragile guilt. I replied coldly, "You don't need to say anything unnecessary." Then I turned to Supervisor Wang and said my goodbye. "I'll be going now." John and Supervisor Wang both took a few steps forward. "Where are you going?" John called out. That's none of your business, I replied without looking back. John stood frozen where he was and after a long pause, shouted at my back, "Then come home early. I'll be waiting for you." I hurried into the city and squeezed onto a train bound for Shenzhen. Before I left, I had checked my bank book. It showed 15,000 yuan. That was everything I had saved up over nearly 10 years. When I arrived in Shenzhen, I rented a tiny room to stay in. Based on my past life memories, I knew the textile factory would collapse within 5 years due to mass layoffs. The industries that would thrive instead were the electric appliance factories, the ones making color TVs and refrigerators. Shenzhen had the largest pool of talent and was closest to the raw materials. I didn't have enough money to start a factory, but I had just enough to open a small breakfast stall. Every day was exhausting, but as I watched the money grow, I felt satisfied. 2 weeks later, a letter from my old village found its way to my new address, though I had no idea how they got it. The sender was listed as Chloe Jiao, the only person in the village who had ever supported my decision to leave. She and I had shared a similar fate, husbands who didn't love us, days spent waiting with worry for men who never came home. In her letter, she said she admired the courage I had to leave and asked how I was doing. Now she wrote that she hoped I would continue to thrive in the future. I noticed in her letter that the outstanding worker title had still gone to me. Supervisor Wang not only refused to give the qualification to Joan but also revealed that she had bribed the judges and was consequently disqualified from the selection process for the next 5 years. She said that ever since I left, John had become especially despondent. Every day after work, he would just stand outside his house. When people asked him why he didn't go inside, he simply said, "I'm waiting for her to come home." I wrote back to Chloe, telling her that if life ever became unbearable for her, she was always welcome to come find me. Once again, I fell into the exhausting routine of selling breakfast on a tricycle from early morning until late at night. The days were hard, but compared to life beside John, they felt like true happiness. At least now I no longer had to live in constant anxiety, wondering when John might cast me aside. Not even a week had passed before Chloe showed up at the door of the tiny room I rented, carrying a bag of luggage. I had just come back from pushing the cart and smiled at her. "So you've made up your mind?" I asked. Chloe helped me push the cart into the yard and answered softly, "Yeah." She ended up renting the room next to mine, and we started selling breakfast together. Our income quickly doubled. After a month, we had saved up 40,000 yuan. Without wasting any time, we went to the market to inquire about sourcing raw materials for electrical appliances. It wasn't easy. We spent several days asking around but couldn't find anything suitable. Then Chloe told me, "I heard about a small workshop in the market today. They manufacture electrical appliances. The owner's from out of town and is apparently planning to leave. He's looking to sell it. We can go take a look tomorrow, and if it's a good fit, maybe we can take it over." The next day, we found the owner who took us to see the place. The location was great, and while the workshop wasn't huge, it was within our budget and capabilities. "Mr. Xu," I asked after our visit, "how much are you asking for this place?" He glanced between Chloe and me, then posed an unrelated question. "Do you have any skilled workers with experience in appliance manufacturing? Do you even know this industry?" That question caught us off guard. Chloe and I were complete outsiders. We had just jumped in headfirst. Mr. Xu looked between us and understood everything. He stared thoughtfully at the workshop and said, "This place is the product of half my life's work. If it weren't for family matters back home, I'd never consider selling it." A thought sparked in my mind. I tested the waters. "Mr. Xu, what if instead of buying the workshop outright, we become investors? You stay on as the owner and handle the technical side. We'll be shareholders and take charge of the sales." His gaze turned distant, and after a long moment of contemplation, he nodded. He agreed. Chloe and I were thrilled to celebrate. We even treated ourselves to a nice meal. But the joy didn't last. Just before we reached home, we saw 2 familiar figures standing outside our building, John and Chloe's husband, Lily. John called my name in a raspy voice. After staring at me for a long time, his eyes were slightly red, and he looked like he had 1,000 words he couldn't say. But in the end, he only whispered my name. I glanced at him with cold indifference. Any happiness I had felt earlier vanished. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my tone like ice. John seemed completely thrown by my frosty attitude. He stood there in awkward silence for a moment before stammering, "I came to see you if I remember correctly." I replied without even giving him a glance. "There's nothing left between us." I truly couldn't understand how he changed so drastically from the cold and indifferent man he used to be to someone willing to travel so far just to find me. He pulled an envelope from his bag and forced it into my hand. "This is the Outstanding Worker Medal," he said, "and the cash prize Supervisor Wong asked me to deliver to you." I felt the shape of the round medal through the envelope, and a wave of emotion welled up inside me. In my past life, I cried for days when I lost this award. John had bought me a cheap imitation medal to comfort me at the time. I was overjoyed. I thought it meant he cared about my feelings, that he had made a special effort just for me. I had no idea it was all a manipulation, that he had used my vulnerability to sabotage my nomination. He only bought the fake medal out of guilt after watching me break down in tears. I took the medal from him, then looked up at him indifferently. "If that's all, I'll be heading home now." Home was just a few steps away, but John grabbed my wrist, keeping me from moving even half a step. I lowered my eyes to his hand, finding the situation more ironic than anything else. I reminded him, "We're in a public place. Aren't you worried that grabbing me like this will damage your reputation as an upstanding teacher?" His body visibly tensed, but he still didn't let go, holding tightly onto my wrist. He remained silent for a long time before muttering, "There's something else I came to bring you." That line caught me completely off guard. I looked up at him in disbelief and after a pause, let out a cold laugh. "Oh, so now you want to take me home so Joan doesn't explode with rage over not getting the Outstanding Worker title?" This was his usual tactic, whether in my past life or this one. He would dangle a piece of candy in front of me, only to slap me awake moments later. Every time he showed me sudden kindness, it always had a purpose, and that purpose was always Joan. John pulled my hand back sharply, and I stumbled right into his arms. It was our first real embrace. His arms were wrapped tightly around my waist, trembling slightly. "I know I was wrong about last time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot these days. I didn't care for you enough in the past, but I'll change. Come back with me, okay?" It was already humbling enough for him to say something like that, but my heart was calm as still water, without a single ripple. I pushed him away firmly. John looked stunned, confused, and even a little angry. "I've already come all this way to ask you sincerely. Stop being so stubborn. What more do you want from me?" That was when I finally saw it clearly. He hadn't changed at all. His show of humility was just a smokescreen. In his eyes, he was still the one in control, the one with the upper hand. The moment I didn't respond the way he wanted, he began to lose patience and edge toward anger. I faced his frustration with calm detachment. "You're the one who came looking for me," I said coolly. "And now you think you've already humbled yourself enough? Don't you think that's a bit ridiculous?" His face darkened, and he looked at me with a heavy expression. After a pause, he softened his tone. "Fine, I was wrong just now. I spoke too harshly. I've just been so worried about you. You've been gone for a whole month. If Chloe hadn't left his husband and your address was found, I wouldn't have known you came this far." As he spoke, his eyes searched mine, trying to read the emotions beneath my composure. Maybe he expected to see surprise or happiness or some glimmer of being moved. Maybe he thought that with a few sweet words I would follow him home again. But that would never happen. Not anymore. I turned my face away and noticed Chloe on the other side, dealing with her own visitor just as impatiently as I was. She was probably saying the same thing I was, that there was nothing left between them. I no longer had the patience to keep playing this game with John. I shook him off and stepped inside, locking the door behind me. He began knocking nonstop, his voice pleading through the door. "Lily, it was my fault just now. Please come out. Let's talk, okay?" Moments later, my neighbor from next door opened their door and shouted, "What the hell are you doing knocking like that? She doesn't want to see you. My kid can't even do his homework." Only then did the knocking stop. After a string of quiet apologies, John finally left. Feeling cheerful again, I carried 3 dishes over to Chloe's place. I was hoping we could talk late into the night. To my surprise, she had also cooked 3 dishes. We looked at each other and laughed. "I never thought he'd stoop so low just to beg you like that," Chloe said with a chuckle. With 6 dishes, we barely had room on the table. I laughed freely, feeling like I had finally crossed the distance of a lifetime. It finally felt like life had truly started. We opened 2 bottles of soda and toasted. I laughed freely, and Mr. Shu had officially agreed to the partnership. At that moment, I felt this was what a new beginning looked like, free from John Miller, free from that relationship that had made me constantly doubt myself, and about to step into a new business venture. Each of those alone would be a blessing. The next day, after wrapping up our morning shift at the breakfast stall, Chloe and I met with Mr. Shu. He explained how to manage workshop employees, how to inspect finished products, and even gave us a suggestion that Chloe and I enroll in a basic mechanical manufacturing class. We didn't need to become experts, he said, but we should at least understand the production process and quality standards for appliances. It was clear how much Mr. Shu cared about his workshop. On his last day before leaving, he even told us to be sure to walk through the place every day. I waved and promised him, smiling, "Don't worry, we're partners now too." Chloe and I followed his advice. We attended the classes and kept running. I was at the breakfast stall to save up money, hoping that one day we could expand the workshop into a full-scale factory. Half a month later, the workshop produced a batch of color TVs. Mr. Shu had returned from his hometown to discuss selling the units. He brought up a challenge. The price of raw materials had gone up significantly, but in Shenzhen, the retail price for a TV was still only 260 yuan. Raising the price would make them hard to sell. Chloe nudged me and asked, "Do you remember how much those color TVs sold for in our village?" "I think it was over 470, I replied. All those TVs were shipped from Shenzhen, of course the prices were higher. The moment I said that, inspiration struck. I slammed my hand on the table and said we could sell them in the south. We quickly did the math on truck rentals and transport costs. Even after expenses, each TV sold outside of Shenzhen could bring in over 100 yuan more in profit. Chloe and I paused the breakfast stall for a week, rented a truck, and hired a driver to take a full shipment south. We sold the entire load of TVs. When we got back to Shenzhen and counted the money, we had made over 10,000 yuan on just one trip. We told Mr. Shu the good news, and everyone was overjoyed. I shared the next step in our plan. We wanted to use the money to buy our own truck and hire 2 more drivers so we could keep expanding the distribution route. Mr. Shu thought it was a solid idea. He even released 30,000 yuan from the original 40,000 investment we made to help us fund the plan. We implemented it over the next 3 months. Not only did we earn enough to expand the workshop, but we also built a name for ourselves in the southern market and established a steady logistics route. Clients buying from us could save 20 yuan per TV compared to other suppliers back in the village. When Supervisor Wang heard I was the one supplying the color TVs, he quickly wrote to me asking if I had any connections. I told him we were planning to expand the workshop into a full-blown factory and that if he was interested, he could invest. He teamed up with a few other senior staff at the factory, and together 5 of them contributed 50,000 yuan to invest in us. Mr. Shu found a better location, and we officially moved the workshop to a new site. Within just 2 months, Chloe and I had become shareholders in an electrical appliance factory. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Mr. Shu smiled brightly and said, "Lily, do you have some kind of sixth sense? How is it that everything you do goes so smoothly? It hasn't even been 6 months and we're opening a factory." Chloe chuckled too. "When I came to find you, I didn't think we'd make any money. I just wanted to do something of my own. I never expected it would turn out like this." I smiled and gave them both credit. "It's all thanks to our teamwork." After the ceremony, we all went out to celebrate with dinner. The restaurant was stuffy, so I stepped outside to catch my breath. That's when I saw John Miller standing outside. I wasn't surprised to see him. For months ago, he had come to Shenzhen looking for me. After giving me the cold shoulder and disappearing for a few days, he had started showing up regularly. He appeared in front of me several times, clearly wanting to say something but never daring to. That had gone on for 4 months straight. I never acknowledged him. I pretended not to see him. Still, there were occasional signs. A lunchbox hanging by the door or a plastic bag with a new piece of clothing made of fresh fabric. Little gestures left anonymously. Eventually, I decided to move. I made a bold choice and bought a 50-square-meter place to live on my own. Ever since then, it had been nearly a month since I last saw him. When Supervisor Wang wrote to me, he spoke in veiled terms. He said John had filed for a leave of absence without pay, supposedly to go find someone, and that he'd probably return later. He also said Joan had been fired from the factory. John himself had reported her for having an affair during her marriage. The factory wouldn't tolerate employees with such conduct. Now Joan was busy begging her city husband not to divorce her. It seemed John was deliberately waiting outside the restaurant for me. When he saw me come out, he slowly walked toward me. In a quiet voice, he said, "I have something I want to say to you." I gave him a cold look. There was nothing left for us to say. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm, but only for a moment before letting go again. His voice was low, and his head hung as if he didn't dare meet my eyes. His voice cracked with emotion. "Just let me say this, and then I'll let it go." I stood still for a long time, watching him as the wind swept through us. He wore a thin, worn-out jacket, looking disheveled and defeated, like a man who could be crushed by a single sentence. His face was still that same handsome face I had once loved in my past life, but back then, he always stood before me with pride and arrogance, never bowing to anything. This version of him, with his head lowered and pride swallowed, was someone I had never seen before. "Fine, 5 minutes," I said, glancing at my watch, cold and unfeeling. John grew anxious. "I've been in Shenzhen this whole time," he said quickly. "I've been by your side." "I know," I answered flatly. He looked at me closely, still unable to read any emotion on my face. He slumped. "I didn't want to accept it at first. We've been together for so many years. How could we break up because of Joan? I've regretted my impulsiveness so many times. I hated myself for not standing firm. I kept thinking about how Joan once saved my father's life. I owed her, and in trying to repay her, I hurt you by revealing your secret." My eyes darkened and I said nothing. 6 months had passed and he still didn't understand why I had truly left. He just thought that if he hadn't exposed my past, maybe I wouldn't have left him so completely. The wind tousled his hair, it had grown long, and his beard had come in too untrimmed. He no longer resembled the polished the teacher he used to be. His face was right in front of me. The same face I had looked at countless times in my past life, yet now it felt like a distant blur, only a faint outline in my memory. Perhaps love had carved that face so deeply into my mind, and now, without love, the details had faded, leaving only a vague silhouette. Through choked sobs, he continued, "I've seen everything these past few days. You're doing better without me." I pulled my coat tighter and looked at him with the same cold detachment he had once used on me. After a pause, I said, "John, it wasn't just one thing that made me decide to leave." His red-rimmed eyes met mine, full of confusion and sorrow. In a broken voice, he replied, "I know it's because I didn't care about you enough." But I shook my head. "No, it's because I can see the future. I can see 20 years from now, and I know you'll still be in love with Joan. What happened recently is just a brief interruption, a moment where you're trying to convince yourself otherwise, but it's not real." He shook his head firmly and denied it. "No, it's not like that. I figured out how I really feel. What I had for her was just gratitude. Lily, you're the one I've always loved. I've gotten used to you being around, always talking to me. Without you, the house is just quiet and empty." He was saying things I never expected to hear from him, things I never thought he'd be capable of saying. Love, it seemed, was one of them. But I interrupted him, calm and unbothered. "Then you'll have to get used to it, because I'm never going to be by your side again." He immediately shut his mouth, his brow furrowed tight. It wasn't anger I felt, it was sorrow. For the first time, I found myself using the word pitiful to describe John Miller. He lowered his head, wanting to speak but unable to. Whether it was from the wind or exhaustion, his shoulders trembled uncontrollably after I said those words. He looked like a puppet who had lost its soul, his eyes dull and lifeless. He collapsed to the ground and let his tears fall freely. I remained cold and composed as I continued, "Actually, it's good that you exposed my past. At least now, nothing else can hurt me. No one can ever hurt me again." John looked at me several times deeply, then finally forced out a single sentence. "I'm sorry." But I didn't respond. Instead, I glanced at the time and said impatiently, "Time's up. I'm going back inside." John didn't follow, he just stood there frozen. Even when we finished dinner and came out, he was still there. Chloe saw him and whispered, "How did he find you again?" I replied casually, "Who knows? Maybe he just can't help himself." Chloe nodded and smiled. "You know, I used to refuse the divorce no matter what, but recently I finally agreed, and now there's nothing left weighing on me." "That's great," I said. "Let's celebrate again tomorrow." I turned to smile at him just in time to catch John still frozen in place. He was staring at me, eyes fixed on me. The moment I looked over, our eyes met. John tried to mimic a smile, but it was stiff and forced, just like the first time we met in our previous life. Back then, I thought he looked charming. Now all I felt was irritation. I quickly turned my gaze away and walked ahead without looking back. The three of us eventually founded our own company and launched our own electrical brand. At first, sales in the southern market were excellent, attracting partnerships with many businesses. With our first pot of gold, I also shared news I had heard that housing prices would soon go up. Chloe didn't even ask where I got that information. She poured all her savings into buying commercial property, and together we ventured into real estate. Our appliance factory paid out dividends every quarter. Supervisor Wang and the others had already received their shares. I called him to ask for his bank account so I could transfer the funds, but he replied that money was unexpected for me, you keep it. I found that strange and insisted on sending it. Eventually, Supervisor Wang sighed and confessed the truth. Lily, that 50,000 yuan John gave it to me. He said, if he gave it to you directly, you'd never take it, so he asked me to invest it in your name. He went on to say that when John first brought up investing in my business, no one believed I could succeed. To them, Wang said, you were just another self-employed individual bound to lose money soon. But after hearing that, John handed over his savings book and told him to give the money to me instead. I thought about it for a moment and still ended up transferring the money back to Supervisor Wang. I told him the factory was struggling now and would probably fall behind financially. Hold on to this, I said. Use it later to help workers who get laid off. The people at the factory hadn't been bad to me. I guess this money could be my way of repaying the kindness they once showed. Later, Chloe finalized his divorce and pulled me to a photo studio to take a picture together. Compared to a year ago when we had just started, both of us had changed. We had become stronger and more resilient. Looking at the photo, Chloe laughed through her tears. Her eyes shimmered as she whispered, Lily, I never thought I'd get to live like this one day. I cried tears of joy too. Everything from before was finally behind us, and from this moment on I knew we would live well.